Hello, this is going to be a review slash summary of Frédéric Bastiat's most famous work, The Law. The Law is a really short pamphlet. It's 55 pages long. It takes about 2 hours to listen to, so I would really recommend anybody who's really interested just to read it. I'm sure many of you already have, and it really is a very clear, very concise, and very readable explanation of the basic principles of liberty. And it really is basic. It starts with natural law, and it moves right on to freedom in almost every area of society. So it's a great little summary of why freedom is important and kind of the principles that underlie the legitimate purpose of the law. And this was written in 1850. Bastiat had a really short public career. It was only 1845 to 1850. He died very young, and the law was written in the year that he died. So it was one of his later works. Most of his earlier writings were about free trade. He worked a lot in France in trying to restrict or remove the tariffs, and worked also with people in England towards the same goal. And he was successful, at least partially, in accomplishing some of that. His introduction kind of to the book is, he says, at the very beginning of the formulation of the science of politics, this all-important question must be answered. What is the law? So basically, the idea of what is the law is the fundamental, the first thing you have to decide in your political philosophy. And that makes sense. And he defines the law pretty well, I think. He starts out with natural law, the right to life, liberty, and property as inherent human rights. So I have the rights to my own life. I have the rights to be free from anybody trying to enslave me, and I have the rights to own property, the right to the product of my labor. And that is typically described by libertarians as the non-aggression principle, abbreviated NAP. It's a pretty universal, I would say, a pretty universal principle among libertarians, that we have these three basic rights, and that it is wrong to infringe, especially wrong for the government to infringe on any of those three rights. In that same vein, we also have the right to defend life, liberty, and property. So if somebody's trying to kill me, I have the right to use force to defend myself. I have the right to use force to defend my property against it being stolen. And Bastiat, in the beginning of the book, makes the claim that those individual principles transfer to the collective. So if I have the right to life, liberty, and property as an individual, then when I am in a group with other people who also have those rights, then as a collective, we could appoint a representative to defend the life, liberty, and property of each one of the individuals within that group. So that's the idea of collective rights. I'll talk about that a little bit later in more detail, but basically that's where he gets the idea that the law is legitimate. The law can use force to protect those three things, and that's it. Because if the law were to step outside of those boundaries and to infringe on those rights, it would be doing something that a person could not do without it being an immoral action. So basically, if I were to go out and steal somebody's wallet, I would be committing a crime. I would be stealing. But if the government were to say, if you don't give me X percentage of your income in taxes, I will throw you in jail. That's the same thing. They're extorting money. But it's wrong for me to do it. It's okay for the government to do it. That's not illogical. set a logical conclusion. So Bastiat says if it's wrong for an individual to do it, it's wrong for the government to do it. And that's the foundation of the law. He goes on to define legal plunder as basically anything that a person couldn't do. So if it violates somebody's rights, the law can't do that legitimately, and that's defined as plunder. If the law benefits one person at the expense of another person, it has committed a crime, but it's a legal crime, so that's why he says legal plunder. There's basically 3 possible iterations of plunder. The first one is limited plunder, and that was what existed kind of in historical societies, in the monarchy, in feudalism, where you basically have a small group of elitist people who are stealing stuff from everybody else. So there's a smaller group that's benefiting at the expense of a large group. And that is somewhat sustainable because it's not quite enough of a hindrance to totally collapse the economy. But the second option became available, which is universal plunder, with the right to vote and the advent of democracy. So now, and Bastiat puts it pretty well, the people who have been exploited all this time by the elite classes taking all of their stuff and stealing from them and them not having a legal recourse, they decided to go into politics. They said, we all pay taxes. We would also like to use the law for our own profit. We demand from the law the right to relief, which is the poor man's plunder. So when you get the right to vote, you can do 2 things. You can take over the political sphere and the political use of force, and you can say, you can either say, I'm going to eliminate all of these legal justifications for immoral actions. I can say, we're not going to participate in legal plunder anymore, and we would have the third option of no plunder. Or I can say, well, I'm going to use the force of law to take stuff from other people and give it to myself, which is what Bastiat discusses in this second section. And that was what was happening in his day, and that's what was happening now with the welfare state. People are saying, well, they're realizing that they can vote themselves money from other people. The government will use force, will take money from some people and give it to them, and everybody wants a piece of that pie. I don't know exactly how applicable this would be, but I have kind of that impression of the Occupy Wall Street crowd, that they were mad about the bailouts because the government was taking money from them, from the average working person, and giving it to these big banking corporations, and they said, hey, that's not fair, you're taking my money and giving it to all these rich people, why don't you give some to us, I want a bailout. And it's a legitimate objection to the government doing that, because that's a immoral action, but the response of, therefore I want to be able to do it to somebody else is not justified, and it just perpetuates the system, and it makes it bigger, and you get to the point where everybody is trying to live off of everybody else, which is what Ayn Rand talks about in Atlas Shrugged. But the third system of no plunder is what Bastiat advocates. He thinks that's the most in keeping with justice. He thinks that would promote peace. It's the most logical. So why don't we all just do that, right? Well, there's two main motivations that Bastiat talks about as to why plunder is initiated. And the first one is greed. Basically, if it's easier for people to steal something, they will steal it as opposed to working for it. If it's easier to work, they will do that as opposed to stealing it. They basically want their needs met with the least cost to themselves. Traditionally, all governmental systems have discouraged theft. Because they understand that if it's easy to steal stuff, then more people will do it. So they punish thievery by saying you have to give the money back, you'll face certain penalties, etc. So that de-incentivizes theft. It places kind of the cost-benefit analysis of theft as, you know, a lesser benefit than just working, being an honest citizen, earning your money, because that's better for society, right, than everybody stealing from everybody else. However, a problem exists when you use the force of law to not punish thievery, but actually to enshrine it. When the thieves take over the government, you have a problem, because then they use the police, they use the jails, they use the court system, all to protect their now legal form of plunder. So it's just a corruption. It places the law, as Bastiat would define it, in the hands of thieves who are trying to get rich at the expense of everybody else. So that's one motivation. The other one is false philanthropy, or false charity. I have a hard time saying philanthropy. So this is the whole welfare idea. So you can achieve the general welfare through the means of general plunder. And this basically is a confusion of the cause of social ills. So basically, people say, you know, oh, all these people are suffering, we need to give them money, we need to set up relief programs, we need to do all of these social things to help them, and they don't understand that the problem is created by regulation. The government creates the problem, and then they suggest more government as the solution, which is obviously more likely to perpetuate more problems than it is to solve anything. It also kind of ignores the problem of, okay, if we give money to the people who need money, then where is that coming from? Bastiat says, nothing can enter the public treasury without being taken from another person. So then you have the idea of theft, the government using an immoral action to provide charity. And that's wrong. If it's wrong for me to steal your purse in order to give it to somebody else, then it's wrong for the government to do the same thing. Now, when we talk about the social programs, we talk about welfare, we talk about public education, stuff like that, like being wrong for the government to do that, there tends to be a perception of, the government, you know, when we say the government shouldn't do it, you almost get the impression that we don't think anybody should do it. And that's not necessarily the case. Because we're against government-enforced education doesn't mean we're against education. Because we're, you know, against government-enforced organizations, it doesn't mean we're against people banding together and enjoying each other's company or whatever. It's just one of those. It sounds logical, and it kind of makes us an easy target to say, oh well, you just hate education, and you know, no, it's not that. We hate education. We want everybody to be ignorant. It's just that when the government tries to accomplish all of these social programs, they do it in a way that is immoral. It violates the rights of the taxpayer. It violates especially rights to property, and it violates other rights in the process, because they really don't know what they're doing. They don't really know the best way to accomplish things, and there's no guarantee of the laws that they place actually helping anybody. It's more that they think it will help people. Bastiat spends quite a bit of time in his work talking about the social democrats who advocate for the people being able to vote, and in the whole voting situation, the will of the people is, always right, always good. They're intelligent. They know the best way to elect the best politicians. But as soon as those politicians get elected, they immediately say, okay, the people are bad. They don't know what they're doing. They're, just going to end in destruction. They're going to destroy themselves. They have all these evil tendencies. Therefore, the wise ruler, must put into effect all of these laws in order to protect them from themselves, in order to force them to be good and be noble instead of following their natural tendencies into evil. Bastiat says there's 3 basic hypotheses, and that one is the total inertness of mankind. All of these that idealistic philosophers of his day viewed mankind as something that could be molded like clay. They could basically make people into whatever they wanted. They wanted to experiments, and if an experiment went bad and they wasted some people, it was okay. It wasn't that big a deal. They would just try again. They had no regard for human dignity, for human choice. It's very condescending, elitist attitude, and he talks a little bit about the illogical thought process behind assuming that all of the normal people are bad and have all these evil tendencies, but either the writer himself or the elite group of rulers kind of standing apart as being the only people in society who are virtuous, who strive for education, who strive for virtue, and that's not really a logical thing to say, that human nature is always bad and people will always choose evil, but we, the all-powerful rulers, are always good and are always fair and generous. It doesn't make a lot of sense. He gives some examples of just the legislature and their view of people and their view of force. Like the San Just one the best. The legislator commands the future. It is for him to will the good of mankind. It is for him to make men what he wills them to be. So that's kind of the view of people's lives as raw materials to be shaped as the ruler sees fit. So he goes on to say, like, those kind of people, they can't really be for any form of freedom. They can't be for freedom on any level. They can't be I'm gonna have to look at the list, but they can't be for free trade, for free education, for freedom of conscience, for anything, because if they give people those freedoms, then people will use those freedoms to believe stuff that's wrong, or, to teach their kids things that are not true, or, to participate in free trade instead of, which could ruin the economy. They'll make bad decisions, therefore we can't let them have that freedom. You run into a situation where it is a total totalitarian state. You really can't let people, if people are so bad that the government has to protect people from themselves, you can't give them any freedom. You have to control every aspect of interpersonal relationships, because there's nowhere to draw the line. Social, conscience, thought, social relationships, education, there's no line to where the law can regulate and where the law should let people be free. And you end up with the law encroaching into people's lives to a clearly oppressive and pretty ultimate degree. At the end of the law, Bastiat presents his view of liberty, of what liberty is. And he says in a free society, people would be free to pursue their natural inclinations and their desires to the extent where they're not harming anybody else, which is a common view that libertarians, people who love freedom, now will say you have the freedom to pursue what you want as long as you don't harm anybody else, you don't infringe on anybody else's rights. He also says that liberty necessitates the law being restricted to a negative law. It prevents injustice. It doesn't positively give you anything. It just protects you from your rights being violated. That one is a little more controversial. It was the one place when I was listening to the law. I read it a while ago, and I just was listening to it on tape in preparation for this video. That was the one part where I wasn't exactly sure if it was purely logical. That the leap between the individual right to life, liberty, and property, and the individual ability to defend life, liberty, and property, and the idea of it being the government's job to defend life, liberty, and property for everyone. I have to look into it more. I know there are definitely people who disagree with it. I have a tendency to say that isn't necessarily a logical connection, primarily because I don't think the government can defend my rights without also infringing on my rights. And so if you want to say that the government could do that, that the law could protect the rights of citizens without infringing on anybody's rights by stealing from them or harming liberty or the right to life, then I guess that would be fair, but I'm not sure that there are very many circumstances in which any form of government really approaches being that restricted. It's almost purely voluntary. So I guess if it is voluntary, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think it necessarily describes any government that typically exists. So that was the only thing I was a little unsure about with Bastiat. I think he had something at the end here that was good. He basically just says he believes that harmony and people will organize themselves within a context of freedom in a peaceful and productive manner, that the legislatures and do-gooders who have so futilely inflicted so many systems upon society, may they finally end where they should have begun. May they reject all systems and try liberty. And I hope that we do reach the point where the people who are moving the world will take Bastiat's advice and will try liberty instead of trying to control everybody through the force of law. So that's about it. That's kind of the summary of what Bastiat thought. I agree with most of it. I think it's very important to emphasize the rights to life, liberty, and property. I think that's a pretty fundamental tenet of freedom. To say that the law should not go beyond those rights is important, and also to demonstrate that if the law were to go beyond that limited scope, that it would be violating people's rights. It would be overstepping its bounds, and it would open the door to all kinds of problems down the road. I think it's fair to criticize the social planners who have such a condescending attitude, who view people as moldable, as bad, as infantile, just not able to do anything right, not able to make good decisions, not able to defend themselves, and basically requiring the government to protect their best interests. So I think that that's always valuable to be said. In general, I think we can discuss. I would be interested in hearing what you think about his whole collective idea of collective rights. And I think I can follow him to a certain degree. I think it would stop short of a traditional government. But I think it is an interesting idea. So again, it's really short if you haven't read it. 50 pages, and it's a nice little treatise on liberty, on why it is so great. It's very well written. It's very poetic, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, I would be happy to hear them, and I will see you later.